My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I'm 28 years old. I was sitting in my luxury downtown apartment last Tuesday evening when my phone buzzed with what would become the most devastating message of my life. The group text for my entire family read simply, "We need distance from you. Please stop contacting us completely." I stared at those words in complete shock, my hands trembling as I held the phone. Just last week, I had paid for my sister's entire wedding, covered my mom's medical bills, and co-signed my dad's business loan. I had been their financial backbone for years, sacrificing my own dreams and savings to keep everyone afloat. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me that this message came just days after I refused to buy my brother yet another car. Before we dive into this unbelievable story of family betrayal and the revenge that followed, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking family drama stories. Trust me, you won't believe what I discovered next that changed everything. The following morning brought a discovery that shattered every belief I had about my family. While reviewing some photos my sister Madison had sent weeks earlier, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of one screenshot, I could see part of a group chat I had never seen before. A group chat that included every member of my family except me. My hands shook as I zoomed in and managed to make out enough to realize this was a conversation about me. I spent the next several hours using every technical skill I possessed to piece together fragments and timestamps. What I uncovered was months of calculated planning that revealed the true nature of the people I had called family. The messages painted a picture so disturbing that I had to read them multiple times before accepting their reality. My brother Tyler had written, "She's getting too controlling with her money. We need to get what we can, and then dump her before she starts asking too many questions." The casual cruelty in those words hit me like a physical blow. This was the same brother whose rent I had been paying for 2 years, whose car insurance and phone bill came out of my account automatically every month. Madison's contributions were equally devastating. Honestly, I only invited her to my wedding because we needed her to pay for everything. She's become so annoying with all her advice about saving money and being responsible. Like, just give us the cash and mind your own business. I remembered how grateful she had seemed when I handed her that check for $15,000 to cover her dream venue. I had eaten ramen noodles for weeks to make that payment possible, telling myself it was worth it to see my little sister happy on her special day. But it was my mother's words that truly broke something inside me. Janet Martinez, the woman who had raised me to value family above all else, had written, "Rebecca thinks she's so much better than us since she got that fancy job. She loves holding money over our heads and making us feel small. I'm tired of pretending to be grateful." The woman who called me crying about every medical bill, every unexpected expense, had been harboring this resentment while accepting my help. My father Robert's messages focused on practical matters. "Once I get this business loan secured with her co-signature, we won't need her financial help anymore. Then we can finally tell her what we really think about her attitude." The business loan I had risked my own credit rating to guarantee, believing I was helping him achieve his lifelong dream of entrepreneurship. However, the most shocking revelation was the role of my cousin Ashley in orchestrating this entire situation. Message after message showed her systematically poisoning my family against me over nearly 2 years. "I've been telling you all for months that Rebecca is toxic," she had written. "She uses money to control people and make herself feel important. You deserve better than walking on eggshells around her, just because she has a good job. I'm so proud that you're finally ready to cut her off." Ashley had been the puppet master pulling everyone's strings, and I began to see her manipulation tactics clearly for the first time. She had moved back to town 2 years ago, supposedly to be closer to family. Instead, she had systematically worked to isolate me by convincing everyone that my financial support came with strings attached and that I looked down on them. As I scrolled through months of messages, I started calculating the true cost of my generosity. Over the past 3 years, I had given my family over $180,000. Money that could have bought me a house, funded my MBA program, or secured my own future. Instead, It had gone to people who viewed me as nothing more than an ATM with an attitude problem. The betrayal cut deeper as I remembered specific moments when I had sacrificed for them. The time I withdrew my entire emergency fund to cover Dad's failed business venture. The months I worked overtime and weekends to afford Madison's college tuition. The countless times I had chosen their needs over my own dreams and goals. Every family emergency, every desperate phone call, every tearful plea for help had been genuine on my part. I had believed I was building stronger relationships through my support. Instead, I had been funding my own isolation and giving them ammunition to use against me. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The hurt was still there, raw and deep, but it was now accompanied by something else: determination. If my family wanted distance, I would give them exactly what they asked for. But first, they were going to learn what life looked like without their personal banker. My first stop was the bank, where I had a very productive conversation with my account manager, Janet Peterson. We went through every automatic payment, every recurring transfer, and every account where I had family members listed as beneficiaries or authorized users. The list was longer than I had realized. I canceled the automatic car payment for my mother's Honda Civic. For 3 years, that $450 monthly payment had come directly from my checking account. I removed my name as co-signer on my father's business loan, which meant the bank would require him to qualify independently or find another guarantor within 30 days. I stopped the automatic rent payments for Tyler's apartment, ending the monthly transfer of $1,200 that had been going on for over 2 years. The credit card I had been using to pay Madison's minimum monthly payments was closed immediately. She had racked up nearly $8,000 in debt, mostly on clothes and dining out, and I had been quietly managing it to protect her credit score. I changed all the passwords to streaming services, cloud storage accounts, and software subscriptions that I had been sharing with family members. Then came the insurance policies. I removed everyone from my family phone plan, which meant 5 lines would be disconnected by the end of the week. I called my insurance agent and removed my siblings from my auto insurance policy, where they had been listed as occasional drivers to get better rates. The most significant change was removing myself from the family emergency fund account that my parents had set up years ago. I had been the primary contributor, adding money monthly for unexpected expenses. With my withdrawal, the account would close automatically due to insufficient funds. By noon, I had systematically dismantled every financial connection between myself and my family. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. For the first time in years, my money was actually mine to control. The first notification of my actions came within hours. Tyler's rent payment bounced, triggering an automatic alert to his property management company. Since he was already 2 months behind before my payments had caught him up, this meant he was facing immediate eviction proceedings. His landlord wasted no time filing the necessary paperwork, giving Tyler just 48 hours to pay his full balance or vacate the premises. Madison discovered her credit card had been canceled when she tried to pay for lunch with friends. The embarrassment of having her card declined in front of her social circle was just the beginning of her problems. Without my payments, her credit score would start dropping within weeks, and the debt collectors would soon follow. My phone started ringing incessantly. 47 missed calls accumulated over the course of the afternoon and evening. I watched each name appear on my screen and felt nothing. No guilt, no desire to answer, no impulse to fix their problems. The silence was golden. Instead of answering, I crafted a carefully worded social media post. Sometimes the most valuable lesson is learning that the trash really can take itself out. Grateful for new beginnings and authentic relationships. I posted it across all platforms and then sat back to watch the reactions. My coworker Miranda Johnson was the first person to offer real support. She had witnessed my stress over family issues for months and had often suggested that I was being taken advantage of. When I showed her some of the messages I had discovered, her reaction was immediate and fierce. "Rebecca, this isn't just family drama," she said seriously. "This is systematic financial abuse. You need to document everything and consider your legal options." Her words gave me a framework for understanding what had happened to me. This wasn't just hurt feelings or family dysfunction. This was a pattern of exploitation that had legal ramifications. I spent that evening creating a comprehensive folder of every financial transaction, every text message, and every email related to my family's requests for money. The evidence was overwhelming and painted a clear picture of manipulation and exploitation. The next step was consulting with an attorney about my options for recovering some of the money given under false pretenses. If they wanted to treat me like a victim, perhaps it was time to explore what legal protections victims actually had. The consequences of my financial withdrawal hit my family like a tsunami, and their panic was both immediate and intense. Tyler was the first to crack under the pressure of actual accountability. Within 24 hours of his rent payment bouncing, he showed up at my apartment building looking disheveled and desperate. The security guard at the front desk called me to ask if I wanted to allow him upstairs. "Tell him I'm not available," I instructed calmly. Through the lobby cameras, I watched Tyler pace frantically in the marble entryway, gesticulating wildly as he argued with the security staff. He remained in the lobby for over an hour, becoming increasingly agitated when his demands to see me were politely but firmly denied. Madison's response was different, but equally desperate. She began sending voice messages to my phone, each one more hysteric than the last. Her wedding vendors were calling to inform her that payments had been declined and contracts were being canceled. The venue, photographer, caterer, and florist had all received bounced payment notifications within days of each other. "Rebecca, please call me back," she sobbed in one message. "I don't understand what's happening. The wedding is in 6 weeks and everything is falling apart. Kevin is asking questions about the money and I don't know what to tell him. Please, you're my sister. We can work this out." My father's situation was the most serious from a business perspective. The bank had sent him a formal notice requiring him to secure independent financing for his business loan within 30 days or face immediate foreclosure on the equipment and inventory he had purchased. Without my co-signature and credit backing, he didn't qualify for the loan amount he needed. My mother's reaction was perhaps the most manipulative. She began calling mutual friends and extended family members, spinning a story about how I had abandoned the family in their time of greatest need and was holding money over their heads like a weapon. She painted herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter who had let success go to her head. But the real escalation began when Ashley decided to take the battle directly to my workplace. She arrived at my corporate office building dressed professionally and claiming to be a concerned family member who needed to speak with my supervisor about my recent mental health crisis. The receptionist, following company protocol, directed her to human resources. Ashley spun an elaborate story to HR about my erratic behavior and claimed that I was using company resources to harass family members and making financial decisions that suggested serious psychological problems. She presented herself as a loving cousin who was worried about both my well-being and the potential liability my unstable behavior posed to the company. My supervisor, Douglas Peterson, called me into his office that afternoon with a concerned expression. "Rebecca, I need to ask you directly about some allegations that have been made regarding your personal life affecting your work performance," he began carefully. The conversation was uncomfortable but professional. I explained the family situation honestly, focusing on the financial manipulation I had discovered and my decision to establish boundaries. Douglas seemed satisfied with my explanation, but I could see that seeds of doubt had been planted. The workplace disruption escalated when Ashley began calling my clients directly. She contacted 3 of my most important accounts, introducing herself as a family member who was concerned about Rebecca's current mental state and suggesting they might want to monitor their projects more closely due to my personal problems. One client, Jennifer Walsh from Morrison Industries, called me immediately after receiving Ashley's call. "Rebecca, I received a very strange call today from someone claiming to be your cousin," she said. "She was suggesting that you're going through some kind of breakdown. I wanted to hear directly from you what's going on." I was forced to explain the situation to my clients, which was both embarrassing and professionally damaging. While most were understanding, The mere fact that my personal life was bleeding into my professional relationships was concerning to everyone involved. The most devastating blow came when an anonymous complaint was filed with HR alleging that I was using company resources for personal vendettas and creating a hostile work environment through personal drama. The complaint referenced specific dates and times, suggesting that someone had been monitoring my activities closely. An internal investigation was launched, requiring me to provide detailed explanations for my phone usage, internet activity, and time management during work hours. While I was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing, the process was humiliating and raised questions about my judgment that had never existed before. My immediate supervisor remained supportive, but I could sense a shift in how upper management viewed me. The promotion I had been expecting was quietly postponed, pending the resolution of my personal issues. My reputation for professionalism and reliability, built over 5 years with the company, was suddenly in question. Ashley's systematic campaign to destroy my professional life was working exactly as she had planned. She understood that financial independence was my power source, and she was methodically attacking the foundation of that independence. Without my job and income, I would be vulnerable in ways that made her manipulation tactics much more effective. The stress began affecting my sleep and concentration. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering what Ashley's next move would be and who else she might contact to spread her poison. The secure, successful life I had built was under assault from multiple directions, and I felt like I was fighting a war on too many fronts. The attacks on my professional life forced me to realize that this situation required a strategic response rather than just emotional boundaries. Ashley wasn't going to stop with cutting me off from the family. She was systematically attempting to destroy every aspect of my life, and I needed to fight back with the same level of calculation and planning. My first step was hiring a private investigator, Marcus Chen, who specialized in personal background research and family dispute investigations. The retainer fee was expensive, but I considered it an investment in reclaiming my life and protecting my future. Marcus's initial findings were more disturbing than I had expected. Ashley Williams wasn't even her real name. Her birth certificate showed Ashley Thompson, and she had legally changed her name twice in the past decade. More importantly, she had a documented history of targeting families in financial distress across 3 different states. In Colorado, she had infiltrated the Peterson family during their father's cancer treatment, convincing them that their eldest daughter was taking advantage of the situation and profiting from the family's pain. The daughter, who had been managing finances and medical decisions, was eventually ostracized by the entire family. Ashley disappeared after the father died, and the family discovered that significant funds had been transferred from his accounts to an account Ashley controlled. The pattern was repeated in Arizona with the Rodriguez family and again in Oregon with the Chin family. In each case, Ashley identified families where one member was financially supporting the others, then systematically turned the recipients against their benefactor while positioning herself as a trusted advisor and friend. What made Ashley's tactics particularly effective was her ability to identify genuine resentments and insecurities within families and amplify them. She didn't create conflicts from nothing. She found existing tensions and fanned them into full-scale wars. Marcus's investigation revealed that Ashley was living far beyond any legitimate means of support. She drove a luxury car with payments she couldn't afford, lived in an expensive apartment she couldn't qualify for independently, and had outstanding debts to multiple credit card companies and personal loan providers. Her financial desperation made her dangerous because she had nothing to lose and everything to gain from destroying stable family relationships. If she could convince my family to cut me off while maintaining their trust, she would become their primary financial advisor and supporter, gaining access to whatever resources they could provide or control. The most shocking discovery came when Marcus located Ashley's ex-husband in Denver. Brian Thompson had divorced Ashley 3 years earlier and was willing to share his experiences with her manipulation tactics. His testimony provided a roadmap for understanding exactly how Ashley operated. She starts by identifying the family member who has the most power or resources, Brian explained during our phone conversation. Then she studies their relationships to find weaknesses and resentments. She's incredibly good at reading people and knowing exactly what they want to hear. Brian described how Ashley had turned his own children against him by convincing them that his work travel was evidence that he didn't love them and was abandoning the family for money. She had manipulated his ex-wife into believing that he was hiding assets and planning to leave them financially destitute. By the time I realized what she was doing, she had poisoned every relationship I had, Brian said. I lost my kids, my marriage, and most of my friends because Ashley convinced everyone that I was the problem. It took years of therapy and legal intervention to begin rebuilding those connections. His insights helped me understand that Ashley's campaign against me wasn't personal. I was simply her latest target, and she would continue this pattern until someone stopped her. I began reaching out to extended family members who Ashley had been cultivating as allies. My Aunt Patricia and Uncle James had been growing closer to Ashley over recent months, and I suspected they were being prepared as her next targets. When I shared Marcus's findings with them, their reaction was immediate alarm. They had already begun receiving subtle suggestions from Ashley that their adult children were taking advantage of their generosity and didn't appreciate everything they had done for the family. She's been telling us stories about how ungrateful young people have become, Patricia admitted. She made it sound like she was trying to protect us from being hurt the way you supposedly hurt your parents. Together, we developed a strategy to gather more evidence while protecting other potential victims. Patricia and James agreed to continue their relationship with Ashley while documenting her manipulation attempts and recording conversations when legally permitted. Meanwhile, I was building a comprehensive case file that included financial records, communication logs, and witness testimony. The evidence showed a clear pattern of elder abuse, financial manipulation, and fraudulent misrepresentation that went far beyond simple family drama. The breakthrough came when Marcus discovered that Ashley had been using multiple Social Security numbers and had applied for credit using information stolen from family members. This elevated her behavior from family manipulation to federal identity theft, a serious crime with significant penalties. I filed formal reports with both local police and the Federal Trade Commission, providing all the evidence we had gathered. Detective Sarah Morrison was assigned to the case and immediately recognized the pattern of behavior from other family fraud cases she had investigated. What makes these cases so difficult, Detective Morrison explained, is that the manipulation often happens gradually over time, and family members are reluctant to admit they've been victimized. Your documentation and evidence collection is exactly what we need to build a solid case. Ashley's house of cards was beginning to collapse, but she wasn't going down without a fight. When she realized that I was investigating her background, she escalated her attacks on my professional and personal life to a level that crossed clear legal boundaries. Ashley's response to discovering my investigation was swift and vicious. She understood that her entire operation was at risk, so she decided to destroy me completely before I could expose her to authorities. What followed was the most intense period of psychological warfare I have ever experienced. The first major blow came through my grandmother Rose, who had been living independently in her own home with minimal assistance. At 82 years old, Grandma Rose was still sharp mentally, but needed help managing her finances and medical appointments. Ashley had been volunteering to help her with these tasks over the past year, and I had been grateful for the support. Grandma Rose called me in tears one evening, her voice shaking with confusion and fear. "Rebecca, dear, I think something terrible has happened," she whispered into the phone. "Ashley has been helping me with my bank accounts, and now she's telling me that you've been stealing money from me. She showed me papers that have your name on them, and I don't understand what's happening." My blood ran cold as I realized the scope of Ashley's manipulation. She had been forging documents using my grandmother's accounts and creating false evidence that I was the one stealing from her. The cruelty of using an elderly woman's trust and confusion as a weapon against me was breathtaking in its calculated evil. I immediately drove to my grandmother's house and spent hours going through her financial records with her. What we discovered was systematic theft that had been happening for months. Ashley had been writing checks from my grandmother's account to herself, forging my grandmother's signature, and then creating false documentation that suggested I was responsible for the missing funds. She told me you needed money for your apartment and that you were too proud to ask directly, Grandma Rose explained, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. She said it would be our little secret and that you would pay it back once your business got better. I thought I was helping you, sweetheart. Ashley had stolen over $12,000 from my grandmother's account while simultaneously convincing my family that I was the thief. The documentation she created was sophisticated enough that my parents and siblings believed her completely. Madison's wedding became the next battleground. Her fiancé, Kevin, started asking serious questions about the family finances when vendors began canceling their services. Madison, under pressure and manipulation from Ashley, told Kevin that I had stolen money meant for the wedding and was sabotaging her happiness because I was jealous. Kevin, being a reasonable person, wanted to understand exactly what had happened to the money he and Madison had saved for their wedding. When Madison couldn't provide clear answers and her story kept changing, he began to suspect that much larger problems were at play. The breaking point came when Kevin accidentally overheard a phone conversation between Madison and Ashley where Ashley was coaching Madison on exactly what to tell him about my supposed crimes. Kevin had the presence of mind to record part of that conversation on his phone. Meanwhile, Tyler's situation had deteriorated to the point where he was essentially homeless. After being evicted from his apartment, he had moved back in with our parents, bringing his financial problems and substance abuse issues directly into their household. The stress of his constant presence and demands for money was putting enormous pressure on their marriage. My father's business was failing rapidly without the financial backing he had become dependent on. The 30-day notice from the bank had expired, and foreclosure proceedings were beginning. He was facing the loss of not only his business but also the equipment and inventory that represented his entire investment. My mother's medical situation became complicated when her insurance coverage was disrupted. Without my support, they couldn't afford the supplemental insurance that covered her prescription medications and specialist visits. Her health began declining, which only added to the family's financial and emotional stress. Ashley skillfully used each of these crises to reinforce her narrative that I was responsible for the family's suffering. She organized what she called intervention conversations, where she encouraged family members to share their feelings about my abandonment and betrayal. The most devastating attack came when Ashley convinced local media that my story was newsworthy. She approached Channel 7 News with a story about a successful businesswoman who abandoned her struggling family and painted herself as a family friend trying to help them cope with my sudden personality change. The news segment aired on a Thursday evening and featured interviews with my parents and siblings, all coached by Ashley to present me in the worst possible light. They described me as controlling, manipulative, and obsessed with money. Ashley appeared as a concerned family friend who was trying to help them heal from the trauma of financial abuse. The story was picked up by social media and began spreading rapidly. My professional colleagues, clients, and friends were suddenly exposed to a narrative that painted me as a villain who used money to control and hurt people. The comments section filled with people condemning my behavior and expressing sympathy for my victims. My workplace became uncomfortable as colleagues began questioning whether they really knew me. The human resources investigation that had been quietly resolved was suddenly reopened as company executives worried about the negative publicity affecting their business relationships. 3 of my major clients called to express concern about continuing our professional relationships while the family situation remained unresolved. The implication was clear. My personal problems were becoming a liability that they couldn't afford to be associated with. My mental health was deteriorating rapidly under the constant stress and public humiliation. I was having panic attacks, insomnia, and difficulty concentrating on work tasks. The isolation was profound because Ashley had systematically destroyed most of my support systems. But Ashley had made one critical mistake in her escalation. By involving my grandmother and creating forged documents, she had committed serious crimes that left clear evidence trails. Detective Morrison was able to use the financial records and witness testimony to build a case that went far beyond family disputes into criminal fraud territory. The recording that Kevin had made of Ashley coaching Madison was particularly damaging because it demonstrated conscious intent to deceive and manipulate. Combined with the evidence of elder abuse and identity theft, Ashley's criminal exposure was becoming substantial. However, before the legal system could intervene, Ashley made one final desperate attempt to destroy my life completely. She convinced my family that I was dangerous and unstable, encouraging them to take out a restraining order against me and to contact my employer with formal complaints about my behavior. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week, and I knew that if Ashley succeeded in getting legal documentation of my supposed instability, my professional life would be over permanently. This was her endgame, and I had very little time to counter her moves. Just when Ashley's campaign seemed unstoppable, help came from the most unexpected source. Kevin Morrison, Madison's fiancé, made a decision that would change everything. Unable to reconcile the caring, generous woman he had known me to be with the monster Ashley was describing, he decided to conduct his own investigation into what was really happening. Kevin was a software engineer with strong analytical skills and access to digital forensics tools through his work. He began by examining the timeline of events Ashley had described, looking for inconsistencies and contradictions in the stories she had been telling. What he discovered was a web of lies so complex that it required sophisticated planning and execution. Ashley's version of events didn't match financial records, didn't align with witness testimony, and contained numerous factual errors that proved she was fabricating evidence. Most importantly, Kevin found text messages on Madison's phone that she had forgotten to delete. These messages showed Ashley providing specific scripts for Madison to use when talking to Kevin about me, including exact phrases designed to make me sound manipulative and controlling. I realized that Madison was being manipulated just as much as everyone else, Kevin later told me. Ashley had convinced her that you were the enemy, but the evidence showed that Ashley was the one pulling all the strings. Kevin's decision to support me came at enormous personal cost. When he confronted Madison with the evidence he had found, she was forced to choose between admitting she had been manipulated or continuing to support Ashley's lies. The stress destroyed their relationship and led to the cancellation of their wedding. But Kevin's evidence was crucial for my legal case. The text messages, combined with the recording he had made of Ashley coaching Madison, provided clear proof of conspiracy and fraud that would be admissible in court. Around the same time, my therapist, Dr. Sarah Chin, helped me understand the psychological dynamics that made Ashley's manipulation so effective. She explained concepts like triangulation and gaslighting that gave me a framework for understanding what had happened to my family relationships. Ashley identified your role as the family caretaker and systematically undermined it by convincing everyone that your care came with unacceptable strings attached, Dr. Chin explained. She exploited their guilt about accepting your help by reframing it as evidence that you thought you were better than them. The therapy sessions helped me realize that my family's vulnerability to Ashley's manipulation stemmed from deeper dysfunction that had existed long before she arrived. I had been cast in the role of the family scapegoat, expected to solve everyone's problems while accepting blame for any difficulties that arose. My cousin Daniel, who had been estranged from the family for over 5 years, reached out after hearing about the situation through mutual friends. His story provided crucial context for understanding Ashley's long-term patterns. Ashley orchestrated my exile from the family using almost identical tactics, Daniel revealed during our emotional reunion. She convinced everyone that I was arrogant and judgmental, that I looked down on them for their financial struggles. By the time I realized what was happening, the relationships were too damaged to repair. Daniel had maintained detailed records of his interactions with Ashley and our family members, including emails and text messages that showed her systematic campaign against him. His documentation provided evidence that Ashley's behavior toward me was part of a consistent pattern rather than an isolated incident. Together, we began reaching out to other family members Ashley had targeted in previous situations. Marcus Thompson, Ashley's ex-husband, connected us with families in other states who had experienced similar manipulation. The Peterson family from Colorado was particularly helpful because they had successfully prosecuted Ashley for elder abuse in that state. However, she had received only probation and community service, which allowed her to continue her pattern of behavior in new locations. We didn't have enough evidence to prove the financial theft, Mrs. Peterson explained during our phone conversation. But your documentation is much more comprehensive than anything we were able to gather. You might be able to get justice in a way that we couldn't. My grandmother Rose became my strongest advocate once she understood the full scope of Ashley's deception. At 82 years old, she was sharp enough to recognize that she had been used as a weapon against me, and her anger about the manipulation was fierce. "That woman used my love for you to hurt you," Grandma Rose declared with steel in her voice. "She made me believe I was helping you, when she was actually stealing from both of us. I won't let her get away with that." Grandma Rose's willingness to testify about the forged signatures and financial theft provided crucial evidence for the criminal case. Her testimony would be particularly powerful because elder abuse carried serious penalties and generated strong emotional responses from juries. My workplace ally Miranda Johnson became instrumental in documenting how Ashley's campaign had affected my professional life. She had witnessed the disruption caused by Ashley's calls and visits, and she maintained records of the timeline and impact of these incidents. "Rebecca, you need to fight back not just for yourself, but for everyone else Ashley might target in the future," Miranda advised. "She's not going to stop this behavior until someone makes the consequences too severe to ignore." The support from these unexpected allies gave me strength to continue fighting when the situation seemed hopeless. But more importantly, their evidence and testimony were building a legal case that could finally hold Ashley accountable for her crimes. Detective Morrison was impressed by the quality and quantity of evidence we had gathered. "In most family fraud cases, we struggle to get enough cooperation from victims to build a prosecutable case," she explained. "But you've built a comprehensive file that shows clear intent, systematic planning, and significant financial damage." The district attorney's office agreed to pursue criminal charges against Ashley for elder abuse, identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence was strong enough that they were confident of securing convictions that would result in substantial prison time. But Ashley wasn't going down without a fight. When she realized that criminal charges were being prepared, she made one final, desperate attempt to destroy me before the legal system could intervene. Hashtag Part 8. Justice begins. Ashley's arrest happened on a crisp October morning at 6 a.m. when police knocked on the door of her expensive apartment with a warrant for multiple felony charges. The charges included elder abuse, identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and forgery. Detective Morrison later told me that Ashley's reaction was telling. Instead of expressing surprise or confusion, she immediately asked for an attorney, suggesting she had been expecting this moment. The local news picked up the story within hours, but this time the narrative was completely different. Channel 7 News, the same station that had aired Ashley's propaganda about me, now reported on the arrest of a serial family manipulator who had targeted multiple families across several states. The investigative reporter who covered the story, Jennifer Walsh, had done thorough background research after receiving tips about Ashley's previous victims. Her report detailed the pattern of behavior across multiple states and interviewed victims from the Peterson, Rodriguez, and Chin families about their experiences. "What makes Ashley Thompson particularly dangerous," the report explained, "is her sophisticated understanding of family psychology and her ability to identify and exploit existing tensions within family units. She doesn't create conflicts, she amplifies them until they destroy relationships completely." The news coverage vindicated me publicly in a way that felt surreal after months of being portrayed as the villain. My phone began ringing with calls from friends, colleagues, and acquaintances who had been confused by the earlier reports and wanted to express their support. My workplace response was immediate and supportive. My supervisor Douglas Peterson called me into his office to personally apologize for doubting my version of events and to assure me that my position with the company was secure. "Rebecca, we should have recognized that you were being systematically targeted," he admitted. Your professional track record and character should have been enough for us to see through the manipulation. We're prepared to offer you a promotion to senior regional manager, along with a public statement of support if that would help repair any damage to your reputation. 3 clients who had distanced themselves during the height of the crisis called to apologize and request meetings to discuss continuing our business relationships. The professional damage that had seemed irreparable was beginning to heal as the truth became public. But the most meaningful changes were happening within my family. The criminal charges against Ashley forced them to confront the reality that they had been manipulated by a sophisticated predator rather than being the victims of my selfishness. Tyler was the first to reach out, appearing at my office with what seemed like a genuine apology. His eviction and homelessness had given him time to reflect on his behavior, and seeing Ashley arrested for crimes against our family had shattered his faith in her version of events. "Rebecca, I know I messed up really badly," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Ashley convinced me that you thought you were better than us, that you were using money to control us. I was so resentful about needing help that I wanted to believe her stories. I'm sorry for being such a fool." However, Tyler's apology came with an immediate request for financial assistance with his housing situation, which revealed that his understanding of our relationship problems was still incomplete. He seemed to believe that acknowledgement of Ashley's manipulation would automatically restore our previous financial arrangement. Madison's approach was different, but equally complicated. She showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning, crying and carrying copies of all the text messages Ashley had sent her over the past 2 years. Reading through them together was a painful but necessary process that revealed the systematic way Ashley had poisoned Madison against me. "She made everything you did sound manipulative," Madison explained through her tears. "When you offered to pay for my wedding, she convinced me that you were trying to control my choices and make yourself the center of attention. When you gave me advice about saving money, she said you were being condescending and showing off your success." Madison's genuine remorse was evident, but the damage to our relationship was profound. Trust, once broken by such systematic manipulation, couldn't be rebuilt with a single conversation or apology. She seemed to understand this and was prepared to invest time and effort in earning back my confidence. My parents' response was more complicated because their pride had been deeply wounded by the revelation that they had been manipulated. Admitting that Ashley had deceived them meant acknowledging that they had wronged me based on lies, which was difficult for them to accept. My father attended Ashley's preliminary hearing, where he heard detailed testimony about her manipulation tactics and criminal behavior. Watching the evidence presented in court forced him to confront the reality that his business failures weren't my fault, but rather the result of Ashley's sabotage and his own poor planning. My mother's reaction was perhaps the most painful because her health problems had been real, and Ashley had used them as weapons against me. She had convinced my mother that my concern about medical expenses was evidence of resentment rather than love, poisoning even my attempts to help with her health care. The preliminary hearing provided crucial insights into Ashley's psychology and methods. The prosecutor presented evidence showing how she had researched my family's dynamics before moving to town, identifying me as the primary financial resource and studying our relationships to find vulnerabilities she could exploit. Expert testimony from Dr. Patricia Wilson, a psychologist who specialized in family manipulation cases, explained how Ashley's tactics worked and why they were so effective. Her testimony helped the court understand that Ashley's behavior represented a sophisticated form of emotional and financial abuse that destroyed families systematically. Ashley Thompson demonstrates classic characteristics of a pathological manipulator, Dr. Wilson testified. She identifies family systems where one member provides financial or emotional support to others, then systematically undermines those relationships by exploiting feelings of guilt, resentment, and inadequacy that exist in most families. The hearing revealed that Ashley had been living entirely off money stolen or manipulated from various family members. She had no legitimate source of income and had been using her manipulation skills as her primary means of survival. Most shocking was the revelation that Ashley had been planning to expand her operations to target my grandmother's estate planning and potentially gain control of her assets through guardianship proceedings. The criminal charges had interrupted a long-term strategy that could have resulted in much larger financial losses. Ashley's defense attorney attempted to portray her as someone who had been trying to help families communicate better, but had been misunderstood. However, the evidence of forged documents, stolen money, and systematic lies made this defense impossible to maintain credibly. The judge set Ashley's bail at $50,000, which she couldn't pay, meaning she would remain in custody until trial. This provided some sense of security for my family and other potential victims, knowing that she couldn't continue her manipulation campaigns while the legal process unfolded. But even with Ashley in custody, the work of rebuilding my family relationships and professional reputation was just beginning. The damage she had caused would take years to fully repair, and some relationships might never return to their previous state. Ashley's trial began on a cold February morning, nearly 4 months after her arrest. The courthouse was packed with family members, victims from other states, and media representatives covering what had become a high-profile case about family manipulation and elder abuse. I had spent weeks preparing for my testimony, working with the prosecutor to ensure that my evidence was presented clearly and comprehensively. The financial records, text messages, and documentation I had gathered became the foundation of the prosecution's case. Taking the witness stand was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. I had to recount in detail how Ashley had systematically destroyed my family relationships while stealing from my grandmother and manipulating everyone I loved. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive, attempting to portray me as a controlling person who used money to manipulate my family. "Isn't it true, Ms. Martinez, that you provided financial support to your family with strings attached?" the defense attorney asked. "Didn't you expect gratitude and compliance in return for your generosity?" The question forced me to examine my own motivations honestly. "I provided support because I loved my family and wanted to help them succeed," I replied. "I never demanded gratitude, but I did hope that my help would strengthen our relationships rather than destroy them." The prosecution's response was powerful, presenting evidence that showed Ashley had created the perception of strings and control where none had existed. Text messages between family members before Ashley's arrival showed appreciation and genuine affection for my support. My grandmother Rose's testimony was devastating to Ashley's defense. At 82 years old, she appeared frail but determined as she described how Ashley had gained her trust and then systematically stolen from her accounts while creating false evidence against me. "She made me believe I was helping my granddaughter," Grandma Rose testified with quiet dignity. "Instead, she was stealing from both of us and using my love as a weapon. That kind of cruelty is unforgivable." The defense attempted to suggest that my grandmother was confused or mistaken about the financial transactions, but her detailed memory and the supporting documentation made this argument impossible to sustain. Kevin Morrison's testimony about recording Ashley coaching Madison was particularly compelling. The jury listened to actual audio of Ashley providing specific scripts designed to make me appear manipulative and controlling. Hearing her calculated deception in her own voice was powerful evidence of her intent to deceive. Victims from other states provided testimony that established Ashley's pattern of behavior across multiple families. The Peterson family from Colorado, the Rodriguez family from Arizona, and the Chin family from Oregon all described nearly identical manipulation tactics used against their families. "She follows the same playbook everywhere she goes," testified Robert Peterson. "She identifies the family member who provides the most support, then convinces everyone else that this person is the problem. She's destroyed dozens of relationships across multiple states." The prosecution presented expert testimony about the psychology of family manipulation, explaining how Ashley's tactics were sophisticated forms of psychological abuse designed to isolate victims and gain control over family resources. Dr. Patricia Wilson returned to testify about Ashley's psychological profile, describing her as a predatory manipulator who targeted vulnerable families systematically. Her testimony helped the jury understand that Ashley's behavior wasn't the result of misunderstanding or good intentions gone wrong, but rather calculated exploitation. Ashley's defense team attempted to present her as someone who had been trying to help families communicate better but had been misunderstood. However, the evidence of forged documents, stolen money, and recorded manipulation sessions made this defense impossible to maintain. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Ashley herself took the stand in her own defense. Her testimony was a masterclass in manipulation, as she attempted to portray herself as a victim of my family's dysfunction who had been trying to help everyone communicate more effectively. I saw how much pain Rebecca's controlling behavior was causing her family, Ashley testified with apparent sincerity. I try to help them find their voices and stand up for themselves. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. However, under cross-examination, Ashley's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. When confronted with specific evidence of forged documents and stolen money, her explanations became increasingly implausible and contradictory. The prosecutor's closing argument was devastating, laying out the complete timeline of Ashley's manipulation and its devastating effects on multiple families. Ashley Thompson is not a misunderstood helper, the prosecutor declared. She is a predator who destroys families for profit and personal gain. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Ashley was convicted of elder abuse, identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and forgery. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month, with Ashley facing up to 15 years in prison. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration as family members and victims realized that justice had finally been served. I felt a mixture of relief, vindication, and sadness as I watched Ashley led away in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, I was surrounded by media representatives seeking statements about the verdict. I kept my comments brief, but pointed. This trial was never about revenge. It was about holding someone accountable for systematic manipulation and abuse that destroyed multiple families. I hope other victims will see that justice is possible. The sentencing hearing a month later brought additional closure. The judge sentenced Ashley to 8 years in prison plus restitution requirements for all her victims. She would also be required to undergo psychological evaluation and treatment as a condition of any future parole. Your behavior represents a calculated campaign of emotional and financial abuse, the judge told Ashley during sentencing. You have destroyed families and traumatized vulnerable people for your own benefit. This sentence reflects the serious nature of your crimes and the need to protect potential future victims. But even with Ashley behind bars, the work of rebuilding my life and family relationships was just beginning. The trial had provided legal justice, but emotional healing would take much longer to achieve. 6 months after Ashley's sentencing, I found myself sitting in my newly purchased home office, looking out at the garden I had planted as part of my healing process. The house represented so much more than a place to live. It was proof that I had reclaimed control over my life and finances after years of manipulation and abuse. My professional life had not only recovered but had flourished beyond my previous expectations. The promotion to senior regional manager came with a substantial salary increase and the opportunity to travel nationally for speaking engagements about family financial abuse. My experience had given me expertise in an area where few people understood the dynamics and warning signs. The company's public support during my crisis had strengthened my relationship with management and colleagues in unexpected ways. I was now considered a valuable resource for employees facing family difficulties, and human resources frequently asked me to consult on cases involving potential manipulation or abuse. My relationship with my grandmother Rose had become one of the most precious aspects of my recovery. She had moved into an apartment near my new house, where I could provide support without compromising her independence. Our weekly dinner conversations had become healing sessions for both of us as we processed the trauma Ashley had inflicted. You know, dear, Grandma Rose told me over Sunday dinner, I think that terrible woman actually gave us a gift without meaning to. She forced us to confront problems in our family that had been festering for years. Now we can build something stronger and more honest. Her wisdom helped me understand that Ashley's manipulation had been possible because of existing dysfunction within our family dynamics. My role as the financial caretaker had created resentments and dependencies that were unhealthy for everyone involved. My relationship with Madison had slowly begun to heal through consistent effort from both of us. She had entered therapy to address her own vulnerability to manipulation and was learning to build genuine independence rather than relying on others to solve her problems. "I realize now that I was angry at you for things that weren't your fault," Madison admitted during one of our carefully structured reconciliation conversations. "I resented needing help, but instead of working to become independent, I let Ashley convince me that you were the problem." Madison's wedding to Kevin had been postponed and eventually reimagined as a smaller, more intimate celebration that they paid for themselves. Their relationship had survived the crisis and was stronger for having confronted the manipulation together. Tyler's journey was more complicated because his problems went beyond Ashley's manipulation to include substance abuse and mental health issues. While he had acknowledged Ashley's role in poisoning our relationship, he continued to struggle with taking responsibility for his own choices and behavior. I had established firm boundaries with Tyler that included requirements for him to maintain sobriety and employment before I would consider any relationship rebuilding. Progress was slow and inconsistent, but I had learned that I couldn't save someone who wasn't committed to saving himself. My parents remained the most challenging relationship to navigate. Their pride had been deeply wounded by admitting they had been manipulated, and they struggled to acknowledge the extent of the damage their behavior had caused. However, we had begun having supervised conversations with a family therapist who specialized in abuse recovery. "Your parents are dealing with shame about being deceived," Dr. Chin explained during one of our sessions. "They need time to process the fact that their actions, even though influenced by manipulation, caused real harm to their relationship with you." The therapy sessions were helping all of us understand the difference between explanation and excuse. Ashley's manipulation explained why my family had turned against me, but it didn't excuse the choice to believe lies without giving me an opportunity to defend myself. My advocacy work had become a passion that gave meaning to the suffering I had experienced. I had helped establish a support group for families affected by manipulation and fraud, and we met monthly to share experiences and strategies for healing. The group had grown to include 15 families who had experienced various forms of manipulation, from financial abuse to parental alienation to elder exploitation. Many of the participants had found me through media coverage of Ashley's trial and were seeking guidance on their own legal and emotional recovery processes. "Rebecca's story gave me hope that justice was possible," explained Sarah Williams, whose family had been destroyed by a manipulator similar to Ashley. "She showed me that fighting back was worth it, even when the situation seemed hopeless." The nonprofit organization I had founded, Families Against Manipulation and Exploitation, FAME, was beginning to receive recognition and funding from foundations interested in supporting family abuse prevention. We provided legal referrals, emotional support, and educational resources for families dealing with manipulation. My romantic life had also begun to flourish in ways I hadn't expected. Through my advocacy work, I had met David Chun, a forensic accountant who specialized in family fraud cases. Our relationship had developed slowly and carefully, built on mutual respect and understanding of the complexities involved in family trauma recovery. David understood the importance of trust and transparency in ways that someone without similar experiences might not. Our relationship was based on complete honesty about finances, communication, and boundaries, which felt revolutionary after years of dealing with manipulation and deception. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment again after months of doubting my perceptions and reactions. The gaslighting and manipulation I had experienced had made me question my ability to read situations and people accurately, but therapy and time had restored my confidence. Ashley's imprisonment had provided practical safety, but the emotional safety I felt came from understanding manipulation tactics and trusting my ability to recognize and respond to them appropriately. I would never again be as vulnerable to this kind of abuse because I now understood how it worked. The financial recovery had been significant thanks to restitution requirements and careful budgeting. While I hadn't recovered all the money given to my family over the years, I had received compensation for what Ashley had stolen directly, and my increased income allowed me to rebuild my savings quickly. More importantly, I had learned to view money as a tool rather than a weapon or a source of identity. My self-worth was no longer tied to my ability to solve other people's problems financially, and I had developed healthy boundaries around financial assistance. Looking back on the text message that had started this entire journey, I could see it as the beginning of my liberation rather than my destruction. "We need distance from you. Please stop contacting us completely" had felt like the end of my world, but it had actually been the first step toward building a healthier, more authentic life. The person I had become through surviving this experience was stronger, wiser, and more capable than the person I had been before. I had learned to value relationships based on genuine care rather than financial utility, and I had developed the courage to defend myself against injustice. My story had become a source of hope for others facing similar situations, and I received letters and messages from people across the country who were dealing with family manipulation and abuse. Many of them expressed gratitude for speaking publicly about my experience and showing that recovery was possible. The last conversation I had with Ashley was during a victim impact statement session before her sentencing. I chose to focus on the positive changes that fighting back had created rather than dwelling on the damage she had caused. "You thought you could destroy my life by turning my family against me," I told her. "Instead, you forced me to become stronger, more independent, and more aware of my own worth. The life I have now is better than the life I had when I was being used and manipulated, even by people I loved." Ashley's expression during my statement was unreadable, but I wasn't speaking for her benefit. I was speaking for myself and for other victims who needed to hear that survival and recovery were possible. As I finished sharing the story, I'm sitting in my home office preparing for a speaking engagement at a national conference on family financial abuse. My calendar is full of appointments with families seeking help, meetings with law enforcement agencies wanting training on manipulation tactics, and sessions with other survivors who are rebuilding their lives. The text that destroyed my old life had created space for a new life that was more authentic, independent, and meaningful than anything I could have imagined. Sometimes the most devastating experiences become the foundation for the most significant growth, and sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted reveals what you actually need. If you're watching this story because you're dealing with similar family manipulation or abuse, I want you to know that fighting back is worth it. The process is difficult and painful, but reclaiming your life and protecting other potential victims is one of the most important things you can do. What do you think? Have you ever experienced family manipulation or known someone who has? How do you think families can protect themselves from predators like Ashley? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it helped you understand these dynamics better. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family trauma and building healthier relationships. And please share the story with anyone who might benefit from understanding how manipulation works and how to fight back against it. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting survivors of family abuse. Remember that you deserve relationships based on love and respect, not manipulation and exploitation. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never be afraid to defend yourself against people who try to destroy your life for their own benefit. Your healing journey matters, and you're not alone in fighting for the life you deserve.